Well, we're continuing on our Exodus journey today, and I'll be reading from Exodus 17. Directed by God, the whole company of Israel moved on by stages from the wilderness. They set camp for freedom, and there wasn't a drop of water for the people to drink. The people took Moses to task. "Give us water to drink." But Moses said, "Why pester me? Why are you testing God?" But the people were thirsty for water there. They complained to Moses, "Why did you take us from Egypt and drag us out here with our children and animals to die of thirst?" Moses cried out to God, "What can I do with these people? Any minute they're going to kill me." God says to Moses, "Go on out ahead of the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel. Take the staff you used to strike the Nile, and go. I'm going to be present before you there on the rock of Horeb. You are to strike the rock. Water will gush out from the rock, and the people will drink." Moses did what God said, with the elders of Israel right there watching. He named the place Massah, which means testing place, and Meribah, which means quarreling, because of the quarreling of the Israelites and because of their testing of God when they said, "Is God here with us or not?" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Yep, they're still in the wilderness, still complaining, still griping and grousing and groaning. Moses is still exasperated. And God is still providing exactly enough for their needs every day. Again, today's reading is part of this great liberation narrative. From the birth of Moses through his death, this foundational story of the Israelites, of the Exodus from slavery to freedom. It gets only 10 weeks of attention during our 3-year cycle of assigned readings, called the lectionary, and 2 of the 10 involve complaining. Last week, food. This week, water. I was tempted to look at what other options were in the lectionary for today, because who needs another story about complaining and being stuck in the wilderness? And then I thought of our own. Yep, we're still in the wilderness too. We have water and food, but the isolation, separation, church from home. Some still work from home. Some still go to school from home, or some combination. And the complaining. People are still griping, grousing, and groaning about wearing masks and social distancing instead of realizing what a wonderfully simple way it is to save lives. Now, I don't mean to shame the Israelites for their complaining, and I don't mean to shame any of us for feeling tired and frustrated. All of us just want this to end. Do you ever wonder why this is happening? Not in the sense of a conspiracy theory, but a deeper why. Why is this happening? And one of the commentaries I read asked a really good, very basic question. Why not lead the people straight from slavery into the promised land? Hadn't they suffered enough? Yeah, so still stop in Palm Springs for 6 weeks, but then get on with it. So, as I've been sharing all along, among the explanations for why it took 40 years in the wilderness is that it takes a long time to unlearn being enslaved. It takes a long time to learn freedom. So they underwent a series of trials meant to form them, strengthen them, and prepare them to be a people with a shared story and experience of what it takes, how hard it is to live with freedom. Matthew Meyer Bolton said, they had to learn that the heart of freedom is trust. I like that. Now, we've been following the narrative in the book of Exodus, but the story of liberation is also told in the book of Deuteronomy, which gives an explicit reason for their 40-year sojourn. By letting you hunger, than feeding you by manna, the people would personally, viscerally understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And Jesus cites this exact verse during his own 40 days of testing in the wilderness in preparation for his ministry. And so I get this. I understand this explanation, sort of, that their trials and testing were meant to train them for a life as a free people, to turn their longing into trust, to turn their doubts into faith, and to turn their complaints into food and water. So I get it. But it makes me uncomfortable. And that's because I've seen it lead to people making hurtful and ridiculous claims to people who are suffering. For example, you were given cancer so that you may come to value life. Kate Bowler writes about being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at age 35, mother of a young child, and in the midst of a promising academic career. She has heard it all, including a neighbor who came to the door and told her husband, "Everything happens for a reason." And he said, "Okay, what is it?" The neighbor looked stunned as he waited. "What's the reason my wife is dying?" Kate wrote a book about it. "Everything happens for a reason, and other lies I have loved." And Christians were particularly insistent that God had a plan for her abbreviated life. So a month into our pandemic separation, she was interviewed by the New York Times and asked about the idea that we should all just stay positive through this. She replied, "The idea that we're all supposed to be positive at the time, all the time, has become an American obsession. Now, the good part is it gives us momentum and purpose to feel like the best is yet to come. But the problem is when it becomes a kind of poison in which it expects that people who are suffering, which is pretty much everyone right now, it expects that people are always supposed to find the silver lining or not speak realistically about their circumstances. As Jeremy said, all emotions are important and valued. And the main problem is that it adds shame to suffering by requiring everyone to be prescriptively joyful. But the most poignant statement of the entire interview is this: a pandemic is not a judgment. The trick is to find meaning without being taught a lesson. Do you ever wonder why this is happening? You know the explanation. We were given this pandemic so that you fill in the blank. And I get the attempt at explanation, and to be honest, I've also tried to rationalize it, to redeem it. But again, it can negate the suffering of the people in the wilderness, whether 40 years then or 6 months now and counting. Can you believe it? 6 months and counting? I was curious, so I went back and looked at some of the sermons I wrote at the beginning of our pandemic separation. And in the beginning, we thought it would only be a few weeks. I mean, take a break, flatten the curve, and we'll be back in the sanctuary by Easter. On our first Sunday apart, I said, if we ever thought that being a church member was coming to church on Sunday, well, this moment is teaching us the value of community. And so reach out to one another. And we created Zoom meetings to stay connected. The next Sunday, I asked, what has this pandemic revealed so far? Well, for one, not providing health care for everyone leaves an entire nation always at risk. But I said it also has revealed the blessing of belonging to a community. I said, I wouldn't say we got the coronavirus so that we can appreciate community, but because of coronavirus, it's been even more clearly revealed that we need each other. I asked, what things are we never going to take for granted again like a handshake, or full shelves at the store, or enough toilet paper at home, the mad rush to school in the morning, dinner with friends. And finally the question, who do you hope this pandemic will help you become? I look back and I think, it's hilarious. We thought we could answer that at that point still. We had no clue what was still coming. So the third week, I spoke of these being inspiring times, praising the heroism and sacrifice of everyday citizens rarely seen in our lifetimes. On Palm Sunday, I asked us to choose vulnerability, like Jesus did, to be awkward, brave, and kind. And on Easter, to be real with one another, and that it's okay to be sad and long for normal. 6 months ago, could you imagine we would have any clue that we would still be worshiping like this? And now, nor do we know when it will end. And neither did the Israelites. Why did they spend 40 years in the wilderness? Well, we're told it was meant to form them, strengthen them, and prepare them to be a people who live with freedom. And part of that is to learn that the heart of freedom is trust. And perhaps that's why freedom feels so fragile for us right now. For freedom to work, we must trust in the institutions to work. We must trust in the constraint of laws, and we must trust in our fellow citizens and neighbors. The real or imagined threat of tyranny in the land of the free right now is not only frightening, the destabilizing power of mistrust makes some fear democracy could topple over. Can the republic survive? How do we explain the wilderness of the past 4 years? Perhaps historians will suggest you were given Donald Trump so that you will come to understand the value of democracy and the rule of law. Now, not the kind of dog whistle slogan of law and order, which is just to uphold the order of white supremacy, but how the rule of law is meant to constrain wannabe dictators. The explanation is that without this disruption of norms, you wouldn't appreciate them and guard them, protect them. And so I get this, like the scripture attempts to do with the Israelites. I understand this explanation, sort of. That the trials and testing of today are meant to train us and form us into a people with a shared story and purpose. But it still makes me uncomfortable. Again, the terrible suffering of so many already vulnerable people. And therefore, I risk suggesting perhaps there's no lesson to be learned. Instead, however, I embrace what Kate Bowler said, the trick. The trick is to find meaning without being taught a lesson. And not worrying about whether we can redeem this suffering, but rather, as the Israelites finally learned, to trust and let God redeem our suffering. Leave our task to keep caring for one another and remain present in this moment, as the song we'll now sing says. You shall cross the barren desert, but you shall not die of thirst. You shall wander far in safety, though you do not know the way. You shall speak your words in foreign lands, and all will understand. You shall see the face of God and live. So be not afraid. I go before you always. Come, follow me, and I will give you rest.